Have you ever been interrupted?
No.
What's it feel like when you get interrupted? Jarring? Okay. What else? What does it feel like when you get interrupted? Annoying, yeah. And sometimes more than annoying, right? You're frustrating. Yeah. So we've all had that experience, haven't we? When we have that interruption. And to recognize Jesus was interrupted. Jesus had been on the other side of Galilee and come back home. And people were all excited to see him again. So they all gathered around him. There was like this little celebration. Oh, he's back, he's back. And in the middle of that, he's interrupted. A man comes. He says, my daughter is ill, almost dying. Would you come? Jesus says, yes, I'll come. So he's walking. And so I'd imagine that the streets, we're probably about this wide. And there's Jesus and the disciples and this crowd of people that have come to welcome him back, and this father. So they're all sort of going together. They're walking down. And as they're walking down the street, Jesus said, somebody touched me. The disciples go, well, look, all the people around you. What do you mean somebody touched me? He says, no, I felt the power. One translation says the virtue, the power, go out of me. So he stops. And this woman steps forth. And in the narration, in the gospel, what it says is that she had been bleeding for 12 years. And had gone to one doctor and another and spent all her money and wasn't any better. But she had this idea that if she could just touch the edge of his garment, that she would be healed. And so she tells her story. And Jesus says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. So that's the second interruption from the first. So now it's like, back, let's go to the house and get there. And the family says, well, you're too late. She's already dead. And Jesus says, I'm here to heal her. And they actually, in their grief, they still laughed at him. And so he sent everybody out, except the mother and the father. And he said to her, little girl, get up. And she did. And she did. So what I have learned to find is that those interruptions, rather than being irritated about them, rather than being disappointed or frustrated or even mad or angry at them, that those interruptions sometimes are those opportunities for an opening in our usual, the way we think life is, for Spirit to come through. So think about for most of us, the best things that happen to us were not things that we planned. I did not plan to meet my wife. I was a music major and had a friend who was a music major who said, oh, we're doing this dinner. You want to come over and eat? And so as there's 5 roommates in the kitchen all cooking away, and I'm sitting there watching them, and the Spirit says to me, she's the one you're going to marry. And so I had this argument in my mind about that. And finally, I said, okay. And for the first time that I heard it, and I've heard it many times since, the Spirit says, don't worry, it'll all work out. And I used to hate that answer. Because I want to set what I need to do, what are the steps. But there's that moment when we're present, when Spirit can come through, and something happens in us in a very powerful way. So the first slide here. So what if those seeming blockages and interruptions are really opportunities to let God's power flow through you in new ways? And the people and the circumstances that show up, maybe they're messengers of God. Maybe they're the way that Spirit is working. And they don't need to be somebody that you like. Don't need to be somebody that you respect. But if you listen, if you're present, something happens. There's a shift that happens in your life. The word interruption, our English word, comes from the Latin, which means between bursts. So an interruption is that moment in between where then something new is coming forth in a new way in our lives. And I actually like to think of them, rather than interruptions, as eruptions. Eruptions of Spirit that are moving in our lives in a greater way. So I have 4 ideas that I want to share with you. My acronym is AMID, so AMID, because the Spirit is amid us, in the midst of us. And what I invite you to think of, that there's going to be one of these points or one of these things that I say, or maybe something that's triggered in you that I didn't even say, but that Spirit sort of drops into your awareness. And hold on to that. And that's the thing to take away from this and to bring to your own life in some way. So the A in amid stands for anchor in the presence. Anchor in the presence. You've got a replica of the words from the Peace Chapel at the village. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. We need that, don't we? You know, we get so caught up in the appearances and the disappearances of the world that we forget that we have this peace. And peace is not a commodity. Peace is what we are. Remember when we sang, I am peace. I am peace. I don't need to get more peace. What was the Rumi quote that you shared about just getting stuff out of the way, right? Of what's already there, that peace, that love, it's already here. And sometimes what we need is what some people call the cosmic 2x4 to wake us up to what's already here in our lives in a greater way. The early followers of Jesus were called the followers of the way. They weren't called Christians. In fact, Christian was sort of a derogatory term, like we used to call the followers of Reverend Moonies. Christians were just like, oh, those Christians. But what's the way? The way is knowing that connection to Spirit. The Spirit, God, the kingdom of God is where? Within. That's the way. That's the way. And when Jesus said, and I love this in John 14:12, the things that I do, you can do also, because I go to the Father. He's showing us because I go to the Father. Actually, he used the word Abba. And Abba, usually translated as Father in your English Bibles. Sometimes we say Daddy, God. But I heard a man speak who grew up speaking Aramaic, the language of Jesus. And he says, Abba does mean father or daddy, or it could be the chief of the clan, the Abba. But he says it's also a term of endearment. My mother would call me Abba, he said. He said, I would call my mother Abba. So what it means is beloved. That's the way that God thought. That's the way Jesus thought of God. Not as something, but as that beloved presence that was there. And so the first thing, if we have that anchor in our lives, that connection, then everything else, it'll all work out, right? But so that's the real foundation for this in our lives. But sometimes it's hard to hold on to that. And so I thought of, this is sort of a Catherine Ponder-esque. So there's 3 phrases to work with. So this one, oh, there's another one. I forgot that one. The divine breaks through the darkness. So when we have that connection that breaks through. Let's go to the next one. Thanks, Ursula. I bless all people, things, and circumstances. So when we're anchored. How many of you do any kind of martial arts? Usually you start out with some kind of pose here. You get centered. If we can have that centering in our lives, whatever we do. So from that, I bless all people, things, and circumstances. Let's practice that out loud. I bless all people, things, and circumstances. And then Catherine Potter would twist it this way. All people, things, and circumstances bless me. And sometimes we have to watch the resistance that comes up in our minds sometimes around that, the stories, the thought. Don't believe everything you think. So all people, things, and circumstances bless me. Let's say that. All people, things, and circumstances bless me. And if something comes up, if someone comes up and they're sort of pushing your button, they're just letting you know you've got a button. If you didn't have a button, they couldn't push it, could they? So they're there to bless you. Say, I've got some work to do. I've got some clearing out to do. It's not, thank you. Thank you for pushing my button. Can we get to that? Well, it'll take practice. It'll take. And so let's say that one again. All people, things, then all people, things, and circumstances bless. And that may be the one you need to work with. And then then there is nothing to deter me from my good. Let's say that. There is nothing to deter me from my good. If there's only one presence, we say that, don't we? There's only one presence, one power. There's only one presence. How could anything deter you from your good? Not possible, is it? But we have to remind ourselves and be drawing here and not operating up here in this wild environment of our mind, coming from Spirit again and again. So anchoring in the presence, that's the first part of this. So M of amid. Make your plans permeable to Spirit. Yes, make plans. And even though you know it's all going to work out, you still need to make plans. I love Dwight D. Eisenhower says, planning never works, but you need to plan. Because when you plan, you start gathering resources together. And the resources will come into play not always in the way and the timing that you think, but you'll have the resources there. So we make plans. And what I found, I set a goal, start moving toward my goal. And after a while, I'll have a point where it's sort of like I've come around a corner, and all of a sudden there's something over there, and I go, that's it. But I needed that goal to be moving. If I hadn't been moving, I wouldn't have seen that thing over there. And I always like to say it's easier for God to change my direction if I'm already moving. If I'm in motion, it's easier to be redirected. So we need to set our goals in our life. And so in Proverbs, we have this verse. I like this. It says, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. So we still make our plans, but we make them permeable to Spirit. One scholar said that Jesus had 35 interruptions that we have in the record in the Gospels. My favorite story. Jesus has been invited to somebody's home, and he's speaking, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees are there. Now, they're the very traditional Jewish teachers, and they've heard about this guy, and so they want to hear him in person, because there's been stories. We know how it's stories. They always are different than what's really true. And so they wanted to hear. So they're gathered in this house. And again, the houses that they had were not that big. The rooms were maybe 10 by 12. And so there's all these people in there, in the room, and there's probably people in the side room, people out the front door and out in the street, straining, trying to listen. And there's these 4 men who have a friend who's paralyzed. And they want to take him to Jesus to be healed. But they can't get there. They're trying to carry him. So one of them says, let's go on the roof, because, the roofs were mostly flat back then. So they find some way to get on the top of one of the houses, and they're walking across. Imagine Jesus is talking away, and all of a sudden there's just footsteps on the roof. And then after the footsteps, all of a sudden there's this noise up there, and some of the straw and stuff is falling, because they're making a hole in the roof. And they make a hole in the roof big enough to drop their friend down. And Jesus says to the men, your faith has made him well. And so here's this interruption. But again, the interruption is an opportunity for healing. The interruption is an opportunity for transformation. So we open those. We have our plans. We have our idea. We're going to get this formal thing set together. And then Spirit's going to break through with something that at first may seem, well, this isn't right. No, it's very right. It's coming to bring something to us in a new way in our lives. So if we can see others, circumstances, even ourselves sometimes in the way, that interruption lets us break through. It interrupts our history or our version of history. It interrupts what our plans may be. It interrupts, because Spirit always has greater good. I'm going to put that one up. Spirit always has greater good for us in our lives. During the Depression at Unity Village, they were drilling for water. During the Depression, they got oil. Bonus! Right? And so it's like that's not what they expected, but that was a gift to them, wasn't it, in that? Rumi has this one. He says, without the frown of clouds and lightning, the vines would be burned by the smiling sun. right? So the rain is an interruption. And then I saw someone shared this quote last week at the village at the music festival. Be a rainbow in the midst of the clouds. Be a rainbow in the midst of the clouds. So whatever seems to show up is an opportunity for us in something else. So another one from Proverbs. A person's heart plans the way, but the Lord. And remember the Lord, when it's in capital letters like that in the Old Testament, it's the I am name, the Yahweh name. So what it says is, a person's heart plans the way, but the I am, that I am within, is directing our steps. When we've anchored ourselves in that, right, then it can move through us in a greater way. So one of the things that I've learned is that when I say I'm going to get to my goal, that I've created separation. Because my goal is someplace other than where I am, right? I'm going to get to my goal. It's a different place and time. And that doesn't work because we can only be here now with this. And so I love the idea of the 12 powers and will. Think it's a willing will. And my will is willing to the will of God. Understanding. I have illumined understanding. Divine ideas come and work in my life. I have a creative, visionary imagination that's helping me see God's possibilities, God's way working in my life. And so recognize that this is so important. We make our plans, but we're also looking. How's Spirit going to interrupt me? What's Spirit going to bring to me that I would not have thought of? And I go, look at that. Isn't that so much better? Isn't that so much better? See, I'm used to doing, when I come to do a church, I'm used to doing music by myself. This is so much better. It's so much better to have such a great opportunity. So anchor in the presence, make your plans permeable to Spirit, and I interact with what unfolds in a way of blessing. See it as a blessing. And I love this. This is from Steve Goodyear, an author. He says, there it is. An unexpected intrusion can be a source of irritation that my agenda was interrupted, or it can quite possibly be the most important thing I encounter that day. So to be open, to interact. So the things that come. There was a woman, it was her mother's funeral. She's at the funeral. She's bereft. She's been taking care of her mom for the last year. Finally, she died. She can't even think of what her life is going to be like next. She's just sad. So and all of a sudden they hear the door at the back open, and hear some footsteps, and somebody sits down beside her, and he goes, I'm late. So she looks at him, and then the service is going on, and finally, after a couple of minutes, he says, well, why are they calling her Margaret? Her name is Mary. And she looks, well, no, Margaret was my mother. She goes, is this the Presbyterian church? I'm at the wrong funeral. But he stayed, because he'd already interrupted. He stayed, and afterwards, she ends up talking to him. A year later, they're married. So was he at the wrong funeral? Apparently not. Apparently he was at the right one. And so it's recognized that something shows up and you go, huh? But something may be there. What's the old phrase? You maybe entertain angels unawares. So to be open to that in your life. I love, Course in Miracles has many lines that I love, but this one I love. He says, my grievances hide the light of God in me. And so many things, something happens, somebody says something, and we get all bent out of shape, you know. And our grievances then hide, not even the light of God in them, it's hiding the light of God in us. And so it's recognizing when those things come up, it's like, you remember that no thing, no event can stand between you and God, because we're one with God. So nothing can be more than that. There's a Unity minister I know, Kathy Norman. She is a relative that has property up in Orcas Island, up in Washington, the Puget Sound area. And they decided that they love the area, they're going to buy a house up there. So they found this house. They talked to the owner, they'd taken a tour. They signed all the paperwork to buy the house. They loved it. And the owner said, no, I'm not going to sell now. And so they said, what are we going to do? Well, the agent says, well, I've got this other house, which was a better price, a better location, and a better piece of property. They got that one. So they got up there, and they thought that was what it was going to be, but it was something else. And so that interruption led them to something even better in our lives. And here again, another quote from Rumi. Those pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them. So those people who are a pain in the neck or another part of your body, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and if you keep saying that, well, she's just a pain in the neck, you'll probably end up with a pain in the neck, I don't think you want that. So they're just messengers. And again, you may not recognize them. It's our opportunity to see it that way in our lives. And to release that sense of resistance. And even those people that we consider insufferable. Where's the suffering? We've created the suffering. If we have compassion for ourselves and them, we can have a different experience in our lives. There was a story of a man who was the president of a company, and they wanted to grow their company. And he had this idea, and everybody had been working together on this proposal to another company that's going to be $1 million deal. This is a big deal for them. It was really going to take them up to another level. So they get the package all together. He takes it to the other president of the other company, presents it to him. All excited, all these possibilities. And at the end, the other guy says, well, that's very nice, but we're not interested in that right now. So he'd driven a couple hours, and so he was on his way back. He decided he'd stop for a cup of coffee just to unwind a little bit. So he gets out of the car, checks it. He doesn't have cell service, goes in, orders his cup of coffee. The waitress comes, and he says to her, how's your day? She says, oh, I lost my purse. It had all my IDs, my kids' IDs, and $300. He's thinking to himself, $300. I lost $1 million. $300 is nothing. So he's drinking his coffee, and then she gets word they found her purse. All the IDs, stuff were in the money was gone. And he's thinking to himself, $300 is nothing. So he goes up to pay the bill, and he has this voice, tip $300. He's going, that's stupid. But he goes, cup of coffee, $300 tip. He does it. Goes out to his car, checks, still no cell service. Drives back to his office. He pulls into his spot in the parking lot. His secretary comes running out. They signed it. The other company had signed the documents, sent over by fax. When he got to his desk, he looked at the time on the fax and the time on the receipt. When he did his $300 tip, it's the same time. So here was that voice that's there, that presence that's there, that wants us to step in to see whatever's showing up. There's something there for us. There's something there in our lives. And at our church, when I was in San Diego, I had the wonderful opportunity of being their minister for 30 years. That was real special. But we had one of our ladies, one of our volunteers in the kitchen, and her line was, I'm too blessed to be stressed. I used to love that. And then what I found is this. So the next one, yeah. There it is. Walking around minding my own business, I'm invited into God's business. And do I know what that is ahead of time? Usually not. And so it's that openness to spirit that's there. So so far, anchor in the presence, make your plans permeable with the spirit, interact with what unfolds in a way of blessing, and the D is derive new directions. If God is ever present, and again, we used to say that God is omnipresent, as if it's a being that's everywhere. But I like to think of God as omnipresence, that presence that is everywhere, that's there. And so whatever seems to be sneaking up on you is a divine opportunity because God's in everything. God's at work in all of that, even those things that we don't think about that. When I travel, I used to do a lesson just after the pandemic called No Normal for Me, Please. Because everybody, after the pandemic, say, oh, I wish things would go back to normal. And I go, no normal for me, please. I don't want normal. I want extraordinary, right? And so it's recognized it. So I was going to the Unity Church of the Oaks in Thousand Oaks, California, and I got a call Saturday. She goes, "You'll never believe, they shared a space with a theater group. The theater group was in the midst of a production of The Little Mermaid. So the stage was set up with waves, all kinds of other things." I said, "Well, what's my lesson title?" "No normal for me, please. This is perfect." This is perfect. And so we have to be open to that and to recognize that we can interrupt our limited thinking. When I was at the church in Merced many years ago, I had a lady who would call once a month. And I'd pick up the phone and she'd go on and on and on and on and on and on about her troubles, her disappointments. And after half an hour, I would just be wilting. My energy would be drained. I'd just go home after that because I had nothing left. And so this had happened, for months and months and months. And then one morning in prayer, because I was anticipating that today was going to be the day of the month she was going to call, I said, "God, I know I'm not doing her any good. Certainly not doing me any good." And God says, "I'm glad you asked." And he says, when she calls on the phone, you don't even need to say anything. Just see my energy through you going to her through the phone. I said, "I can do that." Guess who called that afternoon? She called. And as she's talking, I started that moment of, but then I remembered. And so I just saw that blessing of God. I saw it filling her, surrounding her, moving through all the things of her life. And after about 5 minutes, she goes, "Oh, thank you very much. I feel so much better." Why? Not because of me, but because of God. The presence is there for us, and to see that it's all the way our blessing in our life. And so I just found this. I'm going to have to read this again. I wrote this in my notes today. This is from Myrtle Fillmore. "You don't have a problem except the one that's in your own mind." You put it there. Thank you, Myrtle. Thank you, Myrtle. So in each moment, we want to be present not only with our physical senses, but be present with our spiritual senses as well. That there's gifts, there's blessings, there's divine interruptions for us in every moment. Be permeable to Spirit in our lives. I think of interruptions as the pause that refreshes, taking that moment. And when we do that, we find that there's blessings all along the way, blessings that we never would have thought of, never would have looked for, that are available to us in each moment of our lives. So just reminding again, amid, anchor in the presence, make your plans permeable, make room for God, interact with what happens as a way of blessing, and then just derive new directions from what shows up in your life. There's one presence, one power. Nothing can hinder you or that presence and power from doing its good. So divine interruptions become divine eruptions of Spirit. Let's take a moment in prayer. Thank you, dear God. Thank you, living presence. Thank you, Abba, the beloved. We are open and receptive to your Spirit, your life, your joy, showing up in all kinds of wonderful ways. We keep ourselves open that we may be your instruments of blessing in the world. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Amen. So blessings, my friends.